So EMDR stands for eye movement and desensitization and reprocessing. And it's a therapeutic technique that originally involved taking you're moving your eyes from one side to the next and tracking, looking to the side and looking to the other side, back and forth in a certain rhythm while you were thinking about the traumatic event. And so the idea is to sort of bring the traumatic event or an element of the event to mind. Then you start to feel uncomfortable and distressed. And then you do this short-circuiting activity. And it works. It's amazing. Glad you brought up EMDR because I think it's a very powerful technique and approach, but it is essentially a variant of traditional pattern repetitive bilateral somatosensory activities that were part of every single healing ritual that you can look at across the planet from, Aboriginal indigenous cultures. And the reason that on, all of the different continents, those elements emerged independently is because they work. That when you do pattern, repetitive, rhythmic activity that involve bilateral activation, it could be dancing, drumming, EMDR, davening, lots of kinds of meditative prayer involved, that even the chanting has this rhythm, that actually is tapping into this very deeply built-in memory that almost everybody has, that originated in utero, when our brain was first making associations between interoceptive feedback about are you hungry, thirsty, cold, and sensory input that was coming from outside the womb that was predominantly rhythmic and from maternal heart rate and the opening and closing of the valves of the heart. And it's so that the association between pattern, repetitive, rhythmic stuff as being a way to kind of calm us and regulate us and whether it's through breathing, whether it's through walking or swimming or running or whatever, that's a universally useful element that I think, for example, in modern educational settings, we've kind of cut out. And I mean, the irony is that all the research shows that that's a really effective way to get information into your cortex, to learn new things, is learn it in movement, and you retain better, you test better, all that kinds of stuff. But that simple piece of information, I think everybody can connect to when they start thinking about their own life, right? I really have a bad day and I need to go work out. I need to go running. I need to go for a bike ride. I need to go swimming. I need to take a walk. I need to listen to music. And whatever it is, if you're, some people are small motor people, I need to do my needlework. I need to do my drawing, whatever it is, but it's all pattern, repetitive, somatosensory stuff. And it really gets into the lower parts of the brain and helps, these core regulatory networks that are involved in keeping us in balance. It helps them basically get signals that say you're safe. And then that leads to this cascade of other things that makes it easier to function in relationships and so forth.
Those pattern movements and in some ways, it sounds like you're saying those things are useful no matter the origin of your trauma and the impact on your biology. So if you don't want to spend however many years in therapy to truly understand the roots of X, Y, and Z, doing those things may still alleviate,
Absolutely. I agree.
Your suffering.
That's exactly right. And what I'm also saying is that I love EMDR, but when I'm working with a adolescent who's Cree in far north in Canada, and there's no EMDR practitioner, I send them to an elder, and they do traditional drumming, and it's the same. To me, it's kind of having the same impact. When you experience a traumatic event, your brain, it creates a memory in multiple different parts of your brain. Not just the part of your brain that remembers names and faces and phone numbers, which is the top, the cortex. You also remember the emotion, right? The fear And then you also, even lower in the brain, your body and parts of, your body literally retain elements of association or memory that recreate the physiological state of fear. So literally, you can, 20 years later, you can see a picture of something like a car accident that you might have been in, and your heart rate will go up. And if you could track all these other physiological things, they would activate too. That's the tiny little residual memory. This trauma memory is interconnected. There's multiple components to this complete memory from the traumatic event. So you can remember it and you can feel what you felt like, and then you have the physiological response. But EMDR and some of these other pattern repetitive rhythmic things, what they help you do is that you are helping short circuit the default to that distressful part of the memory. Because when you do pattern repetitive rhythmic activity, you're activating a much more powerful memory that was built into your brain in utero when your brain was making an association between being safe, not cold, not hungry, not thirsty, because you're in utero, and hearing and so replicating that's more powerful than the physiological shred of that trauma memory. And so if you do EMDR while you're thinking about the event, you literally are able to unyoke them. One of the most challenging and difficult forms of traumatic experience to deal with is when the trauma took place prior to like age 3, and you've got the mechanisms to create linear narrative memory. And if the traumatic event took place in context of some of the primary relationships you had as an infant or young child. And so what happens is, and this is just a heartbreaking phenomenon, is if the people responsible for caring for you were also the people who episodically hurt you or were gone or scared you or did whatever, that your brain makes an association between certain attributes of relational intimacy and threat. And so what happens is later on, as you get older, you get into relationships of all sorts. You use all kinds of protective practices, defensive practices, to prevent somebody from getting too close. And if somebody does get too close, you adapt these maladaptive ways to drive them away. And that's the heartbreaking thing, is a lot of people have no idea what's going on. Why do they sabotage relationships? People sometimes walk out of, something like this and go, oh man, I need to learn how to do this or that, or I have to be consistent and like, oh, I got to do MDR. I got to walk every day or whatever it is. But what we know about the brain and about neural networks is that they change. These systems change with very brief, but appropriately targeted activity. And so, as I said before, human beings are very relational creatures. And when we get the nonverbal signals from another person that they're truly trying to understand, that they're truly not concerned about what's on their cell phone in this moment, that they really want to hear us, that literally is a physiological burst of like positive reward. We feel pleasure in that connection and safety, but it also, in that moment, we're wide open for the tiniest little nugget of cognitive or social or motor learning, right? You can absorb a ton in a very short period of time. So that doesn't mean, like if you tell a teacher, gosh, you need to really be there for your kids. And we talk to teachers about some of this stuff and they all get nervous, like, oh my God, I already have so much stuff to teach. And then we try to reassure them that, listen, it's a moment. It's the moment. It's the moment when that Billy really feels, when you say that's a really good job, that you really mean it. And for that 3 seconds, you're with Billy. It doesn't take that much. Just be completely present in that moment and positive things will happen. And what we've seen in our research is that the best predictor of how anybody's doing at any given moment in time is the current quality and density of their relational interactions. It's much more powerful than their history of adversity. It's much more powerful than their family history of mental illness. It's much more powerful than any other indicator that we track. And this is why we love stuff like band and theater and sport and after school programs where kids become part of a tiny little community where they're getting these moments for positive relational connection that really make a big difference. So it's really about, again, it's about biology. It's about learning that you can change the brain by having 31-minute interactions than if you have one 30-minute interaction. And it will be much more powerful. And so it's those little conversations by the water cooler. It's the little conversations when you're walking down the street and you see your neighbor on a porch. It's when you see the neighborhood kid running by and you take a moment and ask him about, did you make the basketball team? Just little doses of relational engagement are what really help people feel physiologically healthy. And that's actually what builds resilience as well. But if you have an opportunity to have stretch assignments or little challenges where you leave your comfort zone and you're able to have some control over when you do it, how you do it. The experiences are moderately challenging. What happens is over time, you actually develop resilience, and it can contribute to healing if you have a trauma-related sensitization. But this is really kind of this is what competition does in sport. This is what performance does in the performing arts. This is what you're, putting together an art show for an artist is. There's this controllable but stressful challenge that you go take the challenge and you grow from it. That's how we grow.
What about for children? What would your number one recommendation be there? Asking for a friend with a very anxious child.
Yeah, no, I honestly, I think that movement is like so undervalued in our modern educational system. If any way that you can get the educators in that child's life to begin to build in sensory regulatory breaks that allow the child, if they are a mover, some kids are not movers. Some kids like to regulate in smaller spaces and do their art or use some other thing. But if the child's a mover, walking, dancing, music, both performing music and listening to music, all of that stuff, appropriately dosed, can really help. The problem with a lot of schools will say, oh, we do music or we do sport or we do whatever. What you find is they make you sit, an hour of moving, as opposed to sit for 20 minutes, move for 5 minutes, sit for 15 minutes, move for 5 minutes. And it's that dosing that really helps somebody stay regulated during the day.
So if a child says their favorite part of school is recess, that's not necessarily because they just want to play and don't want to learn. Like, it's actually serving a therapeutic purpose.
Two really important purposes. One is that the two big ways that human beings regulate is by moving and, these somatosensory things. And the other one is by connecting. It's by being with your buds, with other people. And so those are both really healthy things. I mean, the feedback, when kids love recess, I'm like, that's a healthy kid.